Hey guys, this is Madhav. I'm a newly qualified chartered accountant. I completed my CA final exams in the November 20 attempt. I'm here to share with you all a few tips and tricks on how to prepare and present your paper for the direct taxation exams in CA final. So let's get started. Firstly, before we get into the content, I'd like to break down a few myths. Number one, a good handwriting fetches more marks. This is something we've been told ever since school, but I don't think this is the case, that too in a professional exam like that of CA, because here the content is what matters more than your actual handwriting. A neat presentation would definitely be more appealing to the examiner, but that isn't the ultimatum, because what matters all the more is your content and the way in which you present your answers. Secondly, is 100% syllabus coverage, especially in a subject like that of DT, which is so vast. I completely understand that it is not always possible to cover all the chapters and give a full 100% coverage. However, try to understand and make sure you know the content of those chapters that you've covered. For example, you've covered like 90% of the syllabus, in which case, know 100% of that 90% and be thorough with it and be in a position to answer anything and everything that's thrown upon you as a question in the exam. So that way, it'll still be all right, even if you do not cover the 100% of the syllabus. Lastly, it is section numbers. So to quote section numbers is not that mandatory, and they are not going to fetch you any extra marks, because what matters more again is your understanding of the provisions and the way in which you apply them and give out the solution or the answer, rather than being able to mug up the section numbers and reproduce them out here. Now, let's get into some of the preparation strategies that I used while I prepared for my exams. Firstly, it is very important to make note of all the important adjustments, especially in chapters like PGBP or charitable trusts or things like that. There are going to be a lot of adjustments that come about in every question, and they're all very different from one another. And it is not possible to remember all of them also. So you need to make sure you separately make note of those which are very different or unique, that is very complex. That's the first thing. Secondly, there are certain questions as a whole which you might find very difficult or complex while solving it for the first time. Again, this is something that you need to mark and keep aside or make note of, so that you can use this when you revise subsequently. Next is something that everyone says. Make sure you cover all the RTPs, MTPs, and past papers, but preferably use a compiler, which is like a one-stop solution that has all of this at once. I used Banwar Barona sir's compiler, and it was of immense help. That is one of the greatest resource that you could use as well. His book is amazing. So are his videos on YouTube. And that is another thing that I would suggest. If you are an audio-visual learner, it is always better to use some YouTube videos or revision videos of different faculties to be listening to the concepts and provisions on a repetitive basis. So if you put a video on loop on, let's say, even on 2x speed, and quickly start listening to all the provisions, in a way you can even learn them up and maybe even retain a lot more of the section numbers. And other thing that I wanted to say, which is extremely important, is the last day plan for revision. So that 1 day or 1.5 days that you get before your main exam can be a game changer. So make sure you prepare a chart or a proper plan on how to go about revising all what you've studied, every chapter, every concept, every case law, the day before the exam, because that is quintessential and can help you score a lot of marks and do wonders in your exams. Also, while you're preparing, just bank more on the MCQs, because those are something that can actually give you more marks than even the descriptive, because your descriptive paper is not in your hands. You can write well, you might even present well, but at times things might not turn out to be great. But in case of MCQs, it's a do or die. So you either get the answer right or it goes wrong. And MCQs, especially in DT, are complex, I understand, and they are tricky, but you can still practice as many as you can, and I'm sure you'll be getting to your perfection as much as possible. Then there are a few case laws that are very frequently tested. So there is not a mandatory thing to, again, mug up or learn up all the case laws by their names. It is more important to know what they conclude or what they mean to say or what judgment was meant to be conveyed. And as an outcome, how you would want to approach the case scenario that's been given to you. However, there are a few case laws that are asked on a repetitive basis and they keep recurring in the CA exams. And those are maybe some things that you need to make note of and again be aware of. so that you can write those on quote the case laws in the exam if possible. And then if time permits, also try to go through every illustration and exercise question from the ICA study material, because something that all of us avoid doing, which is a huge mistake, I guess, is to not pay much heed to the study materials. We always prefer a guide or a reference book of some other author or faculty, but with due respect to all of those, I think at the end of the day, ICA study material is a huge resource by itself, and I think we shouldn't neglect it completely. So if time permits, do go through those illustrations and exercise problems. And one last thing is that the repetition is the key. So practice as much as you can so that you'll be able to retain the things much better, because just doing a sum or going through a chapter and provisions once is not going to be of much help. You're automatically going to forget it over a period of time. So plan your schedule in such a way that you mix this subject along with other subjects, and on a frequent basis you keep revisiting those chapters that you already completed and revising the section numbers at random intervals. Also, to cover the RTPs, MTPs, and past papers, do not wait until you cover the entire syllabus. Because like we just discussed initially, a lot of people are caught up in this spiral thinking that 100% syllabus coverage is mandatory and it is possible. So as long as they do not break out of the shell, and as long as they do not look outside or the reality, they are not going to be able to complete the syllabus. And thereby they end up not being able to practice the past papers or the RTPs and MTPs. Therefore, side by side, as long as you're doing your chapters simultaneously, once you're done with one particular chapter, go on to the RTPs, MTPs, and the past papers to refer to those questions that have come from that particular chapter. That way, you can break down these RTP, MTPs, and past papers into segments, and you will be also able to cover chapter wise and have a better confidence and grip over a particular chapter. So when you're done with a chapter, you can actually say you're done with it for good and in a holistic manner. Next, let me go on to giving you a few tips on how to present a paper. So these are the few things that I've always kept in mind, and I think they've always worked for me in any examination, may it be the ones at school or the CA exams. So the first thing is always start with the question you know the best, because the first impression is the best impression, and they actually mean it when they say it. So the first question need not always be the question number one. It can be question 4, question 5, question 6, anything that you know the best. Because once you start with a paper with a question that you know the most, you'll be able to gain confidence for yourself, and the examiner would have a very good appeal towards the particular paper in the way in which it is being answered and presented. Next is do not skip any step while you're answering, especially in your CA final exams. The answer key always contains stepwise markings. So you never know for which step there would be a 0.5 or a 1 mark that is awarded. So even if your answer is actually correct, if in case you skip some steps, you might end up losing a few marks, which is totally unnecessary. So avoid skipping steps. Next is make sure you write a note for every provision or an adjustment regarding the treatment of each of the line item, and make sure it is written alongside with the line item itself. For example, if it's a depreciation or a 43B disallowance or any other disallowances or anything for that matter, make sure you write a note right beside the line item. Or you can also write down all notes together at the bottom of the question, but I still prefer writing them immediately beside the line item so that it catches the eye of the examiner. And then do not write answers in huge paragraphs, because they might be very discomforting for the person who reads, and they might not be able to comprehend what you actually mean by it at the end of the day. So try to stick to bullet points. And lastly, try to highlight and underline the keywords or the section numbers or any case law's name that you're writing, and just try to project the fact that you know the concept well via highlighting or underlining those key points. Now I will share with you my answer paper and a few things that I thought was necessary for me to say. So I'll just show you how I put my plans into action or how I meant to use my tips in presenting my paper. So if you see, this is the first question that I've answered, which is the sixth question. So that is like the last question of the paper, but I've answered it first. And this is the descriptive part of my answer sheet. I've scored a 51 on 70 and a 26 out of the 30 in my MCQs. So I just started out with the last question because I seem to know it the most. So this is how it goes. And it was regarding the international taxation and the place of effective management, active business outside India, and things like that. So this is one thing. And another thing I wanted to tell you was you need not always write paras. Like I just said, you can make sure you write them in bullet points or smaller paragraphs. And You can also diagrammatically or pictorially represent certain things. For instance, this was a question regarding section 94B, limitation on interest that's being paid to associated enterprises. And this is how I represented the organization's structure, or the holding subsidiary relationship, or the associated enterprises relationship. So this quickly catches the eye of the examiner and makes them understand that you have understood the concept. And if you can see here, I have underlined on all the keywords and the percentages or the section numbers or whatever I've quoted. And I'm quite sure that this would have made a better appeal to the examiner. And then for a question like that of 115 JB of MAT, or any long question where you have to compute the total income or the tax payable, this is what I meant by saying that write the notes right beside the provision. So if you're going to be able to write them right beside the adjustments, it'll be of great help. Rather than writing the notes all together below, it is better if you can write them right beside, so that it catches the eye of the examiner and they will be able to understand that you've understood the concept well. So whatever it is, you can just write down the notes right beside the adjustment of each line item. So this is how I presented my paper. And in case you have any alternative views or any kind of an assumptions that you've taken, you are most welcome to write them down so that you let the examiner know that you've understood the concept. So for instance, this was a question on charitable trusts that I'd had in my November 20 exams. And I was having a small dilemma regarding a particular thing on computing the total income and the tax liability. So after my notes, I had taken a proper assumption regarding a few things. So this is the view that I had taken. And I'd given a note regarding this, clearly explaining what I meant and why I had taken the stance that I did. So that will help creating a clarity even for the examiner in knowing that you have understood the question well, and maybe you haven't got the answer completely correct because of the alternative assumptions that you have taken. And then lastly, this is the first question, which is a mandatory compulsory question, which is quite long, but however long the answer is, do not try to just quickly write it in a format that you've ever seen in a suggested answer or a compiler, because always we cannot write the answers in the way they are presented in certain books. Like if you might have seen these questions in PGBP, all those that have to be added gets added up first, and then those to be deducted gets deducted later. But while you're in a hurry of an examination, I don't think it is possible to categorize them in that way and then present your answers. Instead, if you know the concept well, just line item by line item, give it the corresponding treatment to it, and write down the note right beside it, like just I have done out here. So these are some of the things that I thought I'd like to share with you all. And I hope this is of some help to you. Do comment on the comment section below if you need any more help or any videos and any content in future from my side. And also do ping me on the email ID mentioned below in case you need a copy of my certified copy of my answer booklet. So good luck, guys. All the best for your examinations. Thank you.